Hello, and welcome to our second Polkadot Ecosystem webinar. I'm Heidi Pickett, I'm with the TIE, and I'm pleased to be joined with Max, Wilhelm, and John for a discussion around mapping the future Polkadot's strategic role in Web3. Just as a reminder before we get started, this webinar is for informational purposes only and not intended as investment advice. So with that, before we dive in, and I have lots of questions, lots of things that I want to cover today, but let's do a quick round of intros, who you are, your background, and your organizations. And Max, maybe we can start with you.
For sure. Good to be here, Heidi. My name is Max. I have kind of two different hats in the Polkadot ecosystem. One is with Harbour Industrial Capital, which you can see here in my virtual background. Which is a VC fund based out of Hong Kong, which you can see in this part of the screen. And we are exclusively focused on the Polkadot ecosystem, investing primarily private capital from family offices, institutional players in the Polkadot ecosystem. And then the other role that I'm playing in the space is with Polkadot East, which is also a Hong Kong-based association, let's say, supported by the Decentralized Futures Program of the Web3 Foundation, which is all about growth and investor relations for Polkadot in Hong Kong.
Great, welcome. Wilhelm, over to you.
Thank you. Wilhelm Roth. My background is primarily the past MD, one of the first registered crypto funds in Europe as Harbour Capital. Afterwards, as a CEO of one of the top 5 asset managers in crypto in Europe, Iconic, and during end of last year, joining Polkadot, primarily from Web3's initiative to launch 265 Dots, who's heavily focused on investor relations, primarily within institutional parties, advocating on more of the financial side of business development in the ecosystem, and putting Dot and the Dot ecosystem at our forefront.
Nice. And last but not least, John.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Heidi, for bringing us together. My name is John Goldschmidt. I'm with Magenta Labs. My background, I started my career in finance and investment banking, then went into like fintech and startups, and spent a long time there as a kind of early stage founder or early stage kind of employee and founder / co-founder. Got involved, I got involved in crypto in like 2017. My first full-time role was like 2021, I believe. Worked at Polygon Labs for a bit on the enterprise BD side. Most recently was at Outlier Ventures, so focused a little more on kind of the investing and an early stage side of the game. And then just recently joined Magenta Labs, which is a part of the Polkadot ecosystem. Our role is to really empower impactful projects to thrive in the ecosystem, basically by leveraging the expertise that we have and kind of partner network and ultimately unlock resources. Because Polkadot is so decentralized, we see ourselves as kind of glue that brings together, engineering resources, that might be Parity or others, access to kind of financing, whether it's like eco funds such as Harbour, or other VCs, and then kind of helping them to access other third-party resources, that whether they're development resources, or it could be even just community resources. We're there to kind of bring all the things together for builders in the space.
Okay, amazing. Let's just start with the big picture. How would each of you define sort of state of Polkadot role in the ever-evolving Web3 landscape? Sort of like what makes it distinct from other ecosystems that are out there, and sort of why should we care?
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead. I mean, I think Polkadot has come through a real evolution Really starting with such a solid foundation on the tech side, and really focusing a lot on the fact that if this technology, if crypto and blockchain as we see it is going to be around to stay, and is in fact the future, as I think we all believe, there needs to be a solid foundation. Scalability needs to be inherent. Accessibility people won't have access unless everybody is able to participate in this ecosystem. So that was a thing, from Polkadot from the very early stages. And now, as we approach more kind of widespread adoption, I think we're seeing kind of across the board in various areas. But Polkadot, I think, is kind of following that same pathway, and introducing the Polkadot Hub and Jam, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But going from kind of this infra first mindset to like this platform mindset where everybody can participate, and it becomes much more accessible and fluid.
Yeah, and I think, John, you touched on a really interesting point there, like infrastructure. And just about a week or so ago, I was sitting with the Sovereign Fund, and it's interesting to see how they look at us as well, to a great degree. So they pretty much slice their approach and view towards venture and hedge funds and larger institutions from a point of industry. And Polkadot is very much positioned itself as being this infrastructure layer from a perspective of larger institutions, the way it supports technologically and the focus that it kept in it. And that helps a lot when discussing with those larger parties that have long-term mandates and their belief in crypto. So beyond the sovereign funds, we see pension funds like München IE in Germany leading the road for having crypto mandate. And in that way, Polkadot finds its true focus as part of the allocation basket for those larger financial institutions.
Yeah. I'll also jump in and I'll look at it a little bit more from a technical perspective, I guess. What really, because you asked about big picture and what is it that Polkadot is trying to solve for? I think sort of the lens through which I look at Polkadot nowadays is through that of decentralized computation, right? People still are a little bit confused of what that means, and maybe I'll go a little bit more into more detail what it actually does. It's not an easy problem to solve, right? There are much easier things that you can do in the crypto space to get traction and to get some short-term, attention and momentum. That's not what Polkadot is doing, right? Polkadot is really trying to build some fundamental decentralized, immutable computation resources, not just the blockchain, but really like computational resources. And to do that, you kind of really have to have a long-term view, right? Other ecosystems take a much shorter view, quickly launching certain tokens, certain coins, certain applications. Polkadot is tackling a much harder challenge, which is that of how do you make multiple computers work together on a certain problem, and how to do that in a coherent way. That really hasn't been solved before, but it's an incredibly important problem to look into. And yeah, I'll go into a little bit more detail later, but I think in terms of like thinking big picture Polkadot, it's really that. It's not just a blockchain, right? It's about decentralized computation and all the things that you can do with it.
Yeah, that's great. And definitely a good start at the bigger picture. We're definitely going to go a lot deeper, kind of starting with now. But, is there a recent Polkadot milestone that sort of really excites you most about sort of like contributing to this long-term vision that you're just mentioning, Max?
Yeah, maybe let's talk about in terms of like recent milestones. Let's talk about Agile Core Time and let's talk about Hub. So Agile Core Time is quite important for us at Harbour Industrial Capital as well, because it is directly related to the predecessor of that resource allocation mechanism, namely parachain auctions, in which we were probably the most active player. So we supported a large number of projects that obtained parachain slots. And we always did like these direct deals with the projects whereby we said, we can help you get a slot. which lasts for 2 years, in exchange for a certain share of your tokens, right? So this was part of our business model. I think it was a very good business model for us. Financially, it certainly turned out very well. But at the same time, this kind of parachain auction and the lock-in for 2 years also created a certain barrier to entry, perceived or otherwise, because projects were thinking, like, why should I commit myself to 2 years if I haven't even really proven the business case yet? And as a result of that, yes, you had some parachain projects coming on board and building cool stuff, and it always worked, right? So that was never the problem. All these applications ran very, very well and without any hiccups. The question is just, could we have attracted more and more interesting applications if the barrier to entry had been lower? And we're about to find out, right? Because we literally just, about half a year ago, transitioned to Agile core time. What does that mean? It's a transition from a fixed period of time in which you kind of commit yourself to the Polkadot ecosystem and receive the block space that you need as an application, to a more like on-demand, scalable model where it encourages tinkerers, right? Like people who have like a brilliant idea, or maybe not so brilliant idea, to come in and try things out very quickly, deploy a smart contract within 5 minutes, purchase, let's say, 1 block or 5 block or 1 minute worth of block space, and then see if it works. If it executes well, then they can scale from 1 block to 1 minute to 1 hour to 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, right? So it's there, and and the same thing with users, right? From 1 users to like 1 million, 1 billion users. Polkadot provides that, and that's why it's called agile, right? Like this agile core time, the agile part. That's extremely important. We didn't really have that before, and even though we still think it was a good system to start with, because it was a new paradigm shift with these kind of roll-ups that we call parachains, to have like a certain duration. I think it is a better model at the moment because it encourages tinkerers and experimentation.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that's exactly kind of what I was getting at, which is the shift that Polkadot is going through with some of these new developments, and the fact is that the life of a founder is not always linear. It's not always hockey stick. There's oftentimes kind of like an up and a down, and founders need to, I guess responsible founders are aware of that, and they need to be aware of the fact that they have overhead, and having flexibility for that overhead when it comes to the network they're building on is a big thing. It's really important to them. And I've already had conversations with founders who are really solid, have investors, and it's not like they're strapped for cash necessarily, but they do want to be responsible, and I think we can provide now a great way for them to build in a great ecosystem with good technology, the best technology, and not have to worry too much about the commitment right up front.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of you. I think that maybe an additional angle is also the position of filing with the SEC for DOT ETFs in the States. So if you're looking at where DOT wants to be visually for institutional parties, being one of currently 4 front runners, some already, of course, filed and been approved, and our own filing for DOT ETF with 21 shares in Galaxy means that at least we are in the direct view of the largest managers in the globe, and additionally, kind of catapulting DOT from a position where we compete with unholy amount of other projects out there to being really much competing within the top 10, and that I think will give quite a strong backwind to the whole ecosystem. So just to grasp a bit in perspective, at the end, those large managers usually require to have size of the assets, regulatory footing, and team, and naturally the history of the projects, and that's pretty much uniquely positioning Polkadot within a limited amount of assets out there. So that's extremely exciting, especially from an institutional perspective.
Yeah, sort of a validation for institutional adoption for sure, if you can get that ETF for Polkadot. So we'll definitely be staying tuned into how the SEC continues along that path, but certainly exciting. Are there other narratives or developments that you think are important, maybe underappreciated, or what are the key narratives around the Polkadot ecosystem that we should all be thinking about and paying close attention to?
Right. So I talked, about agile core time. The other thing that I wanted to mention in my previous answer that I didn't really get to yet is the hub, right? And Polkadot Hub is an extremely important development because I think we were kind of lacking that a little bit in the past because we're doing this roll-up centric approach here, which is still the way to go. But as a result of that, there was this kind of, I guess, perception that all roll-ups are created equal. And if you wanted to, run a big DEX, let's say, or like a lending borrowing platform or something, back in the parachain days, it was a bit like non-obvious whether you should go to Moonbeam, to Astar, to Akala, to some of the other early rollups or parachains. And I think that led to quite a bit of confusion, liquidity, fragmentation. Now that there's a lot of support rallying around Polkadot Hub, which is in a way like an evolvement of Asset Hub. And people across the ecosystem seem to support it. I support it. The leadership of Polkadot, Gavin is clearly behind it. It is kind of like the central, kind of go-to place where you want to deploy a smart contract, right, or any app. So it's kind of like an easy place to go to. That didn't really exist so much in the past. Now, the narrative that we're trying to create is hub and cloud, right? And cloud is the idea that there is still the ability to run your own rollup, your own kind of parachain, if you want to call it like that, even though we don't use this terminology anymore. But the truth is, for like many, many things that we saw in the past that ended up running their own parachain, frankly speaking, they don't need it, right? It's an overkill, right? It's just too much for it. Like many of these applications, they don't need to be their own chain. They just want to be an app on a chain. Well, chain is actually kind of the wrong word, but let's say like a roll-up. And now that we have this central place, and there is a lot of like great support coming there, it's just about to go live. I think there will be a proliferation of new applications coming to build on Hub because they didn't really like find a natural home in the past. And the great thing about Hub is that it's the same thing whether you're like, let's say Aave, Uniswap, looking to move over to Polkadot, or if you're like a startup with like literally one founder and that's it, you can deploy on Hub very easily, or that's at least the idea here. You can purchase core time, but you have this place where you can go, where you can access liquidity, where you can, still maybe at a later stage decide to create your own rollup, which might be necessary like at the later stage, but probably not at the beginning. And from our perspective, from the Harbour industrial perspective, it's obviously something where we like to invest in, right? In projects that are building on Hub. I still have the suspicion that, many other external VC funds are going to be ignoring the Hub narrative just because they're not so much plugged into it and they're not really like aware of what's going on there. But this is definitely a gap that we're gonna fill, and we're gonna heavily invest in projects that are building on Hub.
Wilhelm, John, anything to add, or any other narratives, developments, underappreciated or otherwise, that should be front and center?
No, I mean, I think Max said it perfectly, and it is. I think there's a lot happening right now. It's underappreciated, and I think this paradigm shift is kind of like the one that we saw in the internet days when storage went from being like centralized to being cloud, it really does change the game. It really does, create accessibility and create more entrepreneurship and innovation. So we're excited. We're really excited to be out there at this kind of when it comes to the mindset. It's still this very early stage, and being able to kind of evangelize. Yeah.
Dan, Max also touched on a really interesting point, and that's the issue of liquidity. And we've seen such developments, for example, especially on the recent development from Velocity with Copper that helps bring and attract additional liquidity into the ecosystem. The cooperation between actually Magenta Labs and Velocity and building those gates are quite critical and important for building a good base. Again, maybe mixing it for the institutional parties to really get into the larger adoption.
Nice. Turning attention a little bit to sort of ecosystem overview and some strategic moves. So, John, Magenta Labs brings leading EVM projects to Polkadot, kind of providing tailored strategies and such. So when you're evaluating an EVM protocol, which go-to-market metrics and risk factors drive your selection process? Maybe talk us through about how you approach this and think about this.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it really. We look at projects from the perspective of an investor more than anything. We want them to be investable. So we don't want to bring in projects that are just going to be, that are just here for the fun while it lasts, and then moving on, whatever. We see a lot of unfortunately, we've all seen a lot of founders, and especially in this space, because because liquidity can be so high and free flowing that people get in and out. But anyway, we want to look at projects that are going to be bringing visibility, credibility, strong user bases to the Polkadot ecosystem, strong actual use cases. We don't focus on kind of the meme coin type stuff. At Magenta, we actually don't focus much on DeFi because there's another BD entity within Polkadot ecosystem called Velocity Labs that focuses more on DeFi. But we do look at real use cases in DePIN, AI, which includes DePIN AI, and also then more on kind of entertainment side of things, which is music, sports, some gaming. But what we look for is really actual daily active, monthly active users. Maybe more importantly, when we look at maybe TVL or something like that, we want to see growth. We want to see growth, not just it's not just a vanity metric there. And then we're seeing a lot of startups that have actual revenue and fee models and commercials. So those are things we look for. And then of course on the other side, do they want to, if they're coming to the hub, that's what we focus on a lot these days is projects that are building smart contracts and can easily migrate over without having any kind of interoperability or security issues because they're relying on, let's say, bridges that could create security issue. So we look very holistically, but most importantly, is there a real business, and is it a good story, create visibility for and use case, bring new use cases.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, for sure. And, Max, definitely want to get into JAM, join, accumulate, machine. Maybe do a little bit of deep dive in terms of, what that is, why it's important, and, how is Harbour, positioning yourself in terms of the promise on that particular technology?
For sure. Maybe I'll do a technical explanation of JAM a little bit later, but first focus more on the application that it actually enables, because I think that's kind of easier to grasp for the audience. Look, I'm kind of thinking about this a little bit, JAM a little bit as the iPhone moment, right? There's this flashy new thing, and it has a bunch of cool features, right? Like, for example, instant messaging or GPS or payments, and all of these things on their own are pretty cool. But it's going to take a couple of years for app developers to figure out what you can actually achieve when you combine these new things all together and make them work together with each other. And only then you have applications like Airbnb or Uber or Netflix enabled, right? So I guess we're still to find out what really the winning verticals are gonna be. But I think the combination of the infrastructure pieces that are getting built out right now on Polkadot are gonna create something that nobody really expected and nobody has ever seen before. Now, but I don't want to be like so abstract. I also want to be a little bit more concrete, like what we believe that some of the more promising verticals of applications on Polkadot, especially Polkadot Gem, are going to be. So I'll mention 3 of them, and I'll give you one example of a company in each of them. So the first thing that we're pretty excited about is DePIN, right? Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Network. We, for example, recently made an investment in, well, not that recently, over a year ago, in Peak Network. Very, very promising DePIN platform that is also a parachain on Polkadot. And what they're really doing is like connecting machines, right? And creating economies that otherwise wouldn't really be able to exist. This kind of machine-to-machine economy. So, for example, it's a lot about like data monetization, right? Like machines create data. How do you connect that data sources with people who are willing to pay for it? Anonymizing data feeds, but while providing an opt-in incentive for the people who generate the data. Usually, the owners of these machines are incentivized to share this data. They're doing stuff on energy, they're doing stuff on renewability, sort of renewable resources, on supply chain, on tracking, lots of things that I could go into. But just generally the idea of decentralized physical infrastructure networks and literally the enablement of those is like a massive use case that, we're literally just scratching the surface. The second item I would like, let's call it like a vertical, right? The second vertical that I would like to touch upon is gaming, right? Because gaming, like in the past, is like, sort of a trailblazing industry. There are billions of gamers out there. They're usually like the first ones to adopt the technology. And, we went to several cycles with blockchain-based gaming. So we all remember CryptoKitties, right? Which essentially rendered Ethereum useless for a period of time because like the blockchain was just so overwhelmed with transactions. And then we had like Axie Infinity, which, created a lot of hype, but actually it was a pretty shitty game, to be honest. It wasn't really fun to play. People only played it because they got paid for it. And at some point, like the publishers ran out of VC money, and then, these things kind of disappeared because you could no longer subsidize the gamers. So it's not a very sustainable business model, frankly speaking, and I don't really like it. I kind of, always knew that this was going to end. If you're talking about gaming, like the only way to make a game sustainable is to make it fun to play, right? That's why people go to a game and play it, because it's just fun, right? I mean, I used to play a lot of computer games, and I played it because it was fun, right? It was entertaining. And now you have like sort of this new generation of kind of AAA gaming publishers coming out and moving into the Web3 space that really know how to create the game that is fun to play. So we recently invested in Mythical Games, right? Who are already building on Polkadot. John Linton, co-founder of Mythical Games, he was one of the core developers of Call of Duty, right? One of like the main AAA games out there, right? He knows how to build blockbuster games. And now they moved into Web3 gaming, right? And combining like this fun gameplay, right? It's just fun to play with some kind of Web3 enabled in-game asset trading, right? Enhances the experience, right? So it's not all about like, this is just a blockchain game, right? It's just like a great game in itself. And by adding certain Web3 elements, like the ownership of virtual assets, for example, you just make it better, right? I think that's kind of the right way to think about Web3 gaming. And I think Polkadot is incredibly well positioned for that. And then really quick, one last vertical that I'll mention, and that's kind of an interesting one that I realize very few people are paying attention to, is government services, right? So sometimes we think of these as like kind of the opposite, Web3 and the government. It's not really that black and white. Many governments, want to provide good services to their citizens, and that can be like very mundane services such as, I don't know, vehicle registration, or like land registry, or hospital records or healthcare records, right? Essentially always with the question how to keep them safe, right? How to keep them safe against hacks, against exploitation, against undue data mining, abuse of power. These are some very real questions, right? I come from Austria, right? Austria is a fairly developed country, but we recently had like a big hack of the traditional, immigration department, where like thousands of like passport data sets were stolen by hackers, right? Directly from the ministry that processes them. And so I guess governments around the world are also looking how to use blockchain-based systems to create better and, importantly, more secure services for their citizens. And in that realm, we recently made an investment in Mandala Chain, which is based out of Indonesia. And they are working very closely with the Indonesian government to provide like services to the citizens of Indonesia. Indonesia has a very aggressive roadmap for the adoption of Web3 technology, and for, I think they call it like the Web3 roadmap or something like that. They literally want this to happen, but obviously they rely on private companies to do the technical implementation, right? These government citizen services. And Mandala Chain is doing exactly that in Indonesia, and we're very excited to be invested there and to support them. So I'll wrap here. These are some of many verticals that we have.
Yeah, and I would just, I think this is, as somebody who's relatively new to the Polkadot ecosystem, I've been familiar with Polkadot for a long time, and but as somebody who's now like formally within the ecosystem, I see like there's a lot of like heads down building going on, and there's a lot of really strong use cases that are like real Trojan horses, and that people aren't, it's not the shiny object necessarily. Mythical Games is great, everybody, because it's entertainment and everybody loves it. But the thing that nobody's talked about too much is the fact that they're onboarding millions of users with wallets who don't even know they have wallets. Don't even know their wallets. They don't even know that they're earning NFTs, but they're getting them. And this is how they're going to start learning about digital ownership. It's not by reading about it, or by like even their friend telling them about it. It's about actually doing it, not even knowing they're doing it. I think Polkadot is minting the most NFTs of any chain right now because of Mythical Games. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something I read just last week. Likewise with Peak, they have partnerships with Airbus, MasterCard, Continental. They have these huge enterprises that are like engaging with them because they're doing real world stuff, and they're not necessarily out there, making headlines every day. They are, but not the way that some of the like meme coins do, or like some of these other shiny objects. But it's real like Trojan horse adoption that is just kind of underappreciated. And same thing with the government services. Maybe not the most sexy like vertical right now, but it's like this is how adoption happens. And I see Polkadot here like just grinding away, because there's an ability, like a technical ability to bring all these users in, just making it happen. And then we'll talk about it whenever everybody looks around and says, oh wow, almost everybody's on Polkadot now. Like it's just gonna happen.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see just how much is being done across so many different verticals. And we had John from Mythical Games on our last webinar that was like fully gaming focused on Polkadot, which was like super exciting. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage all our viewers right now to check that out on our YouTube. Certainly an exciting space on Polkadot for sure. I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into sort of this PolkaPort East, Max, that you mentioned in your intro. Sort of what is it, maybe a little bit more depth, what is it trying to accomplish, and sort of the goals in terms of contributing to the ecosystem more broadly?
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for that question. As you can see from my virtual background, I'm sitting here in Hong Kong. So PolkaPort East is all about Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is really quite an important city in the crypto world. I don't know if many people realize that, but it's a very progressive city when it comes to crypto regulations, and therefore we decided to focus on the city of Hong Kong and really building like a strong foothold for Polkadot in the city, and for that received the support of the Decentralized Futures Program of the Web3 Foundation. What is it really that we're doing? Well, I think it's all about IR and growth. So one thing, for example, is we're working towards an ETF in Hong Kong. It's not done yet; it's work in progress, so I cannot really say too much about it yet. But I guess one of the important differentiators would be that it's a staking ETF, right? An ETF where you can get staking rewards, which is, I think, quite a differentiator to some of the other international ETFs out there. So this is work in progress. It's one of the initiatives that PolkaPort East has been working on. We're also working on OTC deals, which is kind of the idea of like getting large institutional players to buy into Polkadot, into the DOT token in an OTC fashion. We're also working on stable coins. Stable coins, obviously a massive topic. Hong Kong literally just last week just passed a new stablecoin bill, which introduces like a new regulatory framework by the HKMA, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, to issue licenses to stablecoin providers to issue like a Hong Kong dollar stablecoin, which, and as a little side note, the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar. So indirectly, it's also a US dollar stablecoin, right? But it's also kind of like a Trojan horse into the stablecoin market of US pegged coins. But anyways, so we have this new licensing regime, which very much like encourages issuers to come. And we are in touch with like multiple of the issuers who are in the process of issuing a Hong Kong dollar stablecoin. We want them to issue it on Polkadot, right? So again, it's not really a done deal yet, so I can't really like say too much about it again. But it's something that we're working on, and that I would be very happy to see if it actually happens. And then more generally, we're working on various growth initiatives. As I said, the government in Hong Kong is very pro crypto. CyberPort is like the government's innovation hub. They have their own like Web3 division. When we had the Jam tour here, Gavin came out to Hong Kong. He held like the Jam lecture at Cyberport. We did the PBA there, but it's actually like a government-run kind of innovation center, you can say. And so we have like a strong partnership with them, which is all about like bringing Polkadot-based projects to Hong Kong, and providing support for them that they need. We're also working, and this is also something I'm very excited about, Oasis, which is the Office for Attracting Strategic Foreign Enterprises, if I got the acronym right. But yeah, it's basically a government agency that tries to get like promising projects to Hong Kong. We've got a partnership there. It's really good to see that, the Hong Kong government is really embracing the sector. I know, in other parts of the world now, in America under the Trump administration, it's also more and more like that. But I guess Hong Kong has been crypto friendly for much longer already. And it's very stable. It's very predictable. It's a friendly environment for the sector. Many great companies, many great crypto companies trace their origins to Hong Kong. And we want to make sure that Polkadot has a strong foothold in the city. This is literally what PolkaPort East is all about.
Very cool, very exciting, and it sounds like we should all be paying attention to see what comes out of the stablecoin and Polkadot's play in that space. Willem, welcome back. Would love to bring you into this conversation. We had touched upon the ETFs and status here in the US, but just in terms of like further institutional adoption, what are you seeing, and what do you think we can expect going forward? What's most exciting for institutions as they think about Polkadot specifically?
Well, I think the most critical part in there is critical fundamental point is how Polkadot is positioned in the view of regulators, both in the US, apologies, as well as in Europe and globally. The more consistent the noise around DOT as commodity and the way that this is being positioned with the regulators eases a lot of friction that Polkadot as an ecosystem as a whole, but naturally heavily from the financial institution side, how it looks and positioned itself to those parties and what they can do with it. Now, if we're looking specifically for the US, I mean, we've seen two main issuers, right? 21 Shares and Galaxy leading the way. And it's also quite a great privilege for 265 Dots to give as much aid as we can from the IR side to support the campaign to raise as much assets to the final revision and opening of the ETFs in the States. And that will naturally trickle down and give quite a big effect for other ETPs, ETNs, ETCs, and ETFs filings throughout the globe, as naturally the American giant is opening up its gates towards crypto adoption and financial products. And I see it as a really great first step, especially if you look at it from, let's say, as an investment group perspective, to have licensed, regulated products that you can actually easily provide an access to a vast variety of institutions, from hedge funds, family offices, funds of funds, all the way up to pension and sovereign funds. And I think this is kind of a critical capital moment where DOT can really outshine. And in that, we've seen that DOT as an ecosystem has been, I think, rightfully focused so much on the tech side, being adhering to what it aimed to build in the long run, as Max and John also pointed out, having this long-term perspective from building a proper product, not just an MVP, not just hopefully something that can be become a proper product, but to actually get ourselves with strong marketing, investor relation arms, which all of us here around this panel are focusing within our own specific.
And just staying with you for a second, there's this Copper Velocity Labs custody partnership. How does that change institutional investors' risk assessments of Polkadot, and what new risk management frameworks is 265 Dots recommending?
Well, I think that as you stated at the start, don't take any recommendation as a financial advice. So
that is true. Fair enough.
Have to skip that part. But I think that there is enough projects out there, native projects, let's say, like Fireblocks, Copper, and an array, Zodia, array of custodial partners that have been developing their solutions. Some of them, from my more TradFi perspective, are not yet true custody, but are definitely advancing towards becoming ones. That might be also similar to some of the stablecoin discussions we had prior to their actual role. But what it means in practicality is just that if you're putting ahead of an investor and you're approaching a hedge fund or a venture group or any product, you want to know that you're at least trading with some layers of security. Nothing is guaranteed, right? We're still operating within financial markets. Whatever so-called advised decision you make might be right one day and wrong the next day, depending, what is changing in the ever fast track change of macroeconomics globally. But at least having this custodial support mean two great things. One, a sense of security, and from that also the ability to deploy larger and larger sizes.
Nice. And, maybe it's a good time to turn to elastic scaling. What does it do and how does it boost performance while preserving security and decentralization? I don't know who wants to kick that off. And I think John lost audio, so I don't know if Max or Wilhelm want to address that, or we can wait till John comes back. Okay, we can wait till he comes back and go into elastic scaling. In the meantime, Max, you had mentioned Gavin being in Hong Kong. Maybe talk a little bit about Jam and how it aligns with his vision of, the world's supercomputer on which anything and everything can run, referencing obviously Polkadot.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about Jam, right? Because I think Jam is kind of the elephant in the room, and it's a major upgrade. And I think still very, very few people actually understand what it is. So I'm constantly talking to like investors or builders and try to explain what Jam is. And so I'm using a couple of analogies that maybe are helpful here. If I just have like 5 seconds to say what, to tell people what Jam is, the easiest way to think of it is a scaling solution, right? It just makes it easier to grow like the amount of data that Polkadot processes. So that's like an explanation, but it's not the best explanation. It's a bit of a lazy explanation because scaling itself isn't really like the breakthrough that Jam accomplishes. In my opinion, this is kind of my opinion, but bear with me. In my opinion, the breakthrough of Jam is generalization of computation, right? And that's something that you probably can only understand like in a bit of a historic context. Many technological evolutions went from like something highly specialized to something very general. And I guess that's what we're seeing with the evolution of blockchains, which is culminating in the creation of Jam. So it sounds a little bit abstract. I'll try to make it a bit more concrete. And I'll use one comparison that is quite often used nowadays to explain this. And that is the idea that, Bitcoin, you can think of it as a calculator, right? You can type in like some, additions, subtractions, dividing, very basic tool, right? Useful, no doubt. Of course, a calculator is useful, but still a rather basic tool. Ethereum is kind of a computer, right? Like a PC that sits at home. It's one machine that runs and does its thing, right? And then in this analogy, Polkadot is a multi-core server that connects a bunch of machines with each other. But as I said at the beginning, the real breakthrough of Jam is not necessarily like the scaling to make it like bigger and more data, like sort of increase data availability, but the real breakthrough is the generalization. So let's stick with this example from just before, right? If you think of this history of distributed computation, like Bitcoin is kind of a blockchain that is like a ledger that adds and subtracts values, right? Sending a Bitcoin from A to B, subtracting and adding values. That's a very, very specific task, right? It's just one thing. So Bitcoin, like what it does, it sends Bitcoin from A to B. Like that's literally all it does, right? It's very good at that, obviously, but that's all it does. Ethereum now adds like a simple logic to it. We call it like smart contracts, and that makes it more general, right? So, rather than like just adding and subtracting, you now can also have like a logic such as like if this, then that. If X is bigger than Y, do this, otherwise do that, right? So this kind of programming language, the smart contracts. So that kind of makes it a bit more general, right? But still not all the way general. I mean, there are lots of things that you can't do on Ethereum, quite obviously. And then you kind of get into Polkadot Jam. And what the real revolution here is, in my opinion, is that Polkadot Jam allows you to run any machine readable code and execute it on a decentralized network, right? So obviously you could already run, any machine readable code on a single machine, right? No problem. But you were not really able in the past to run it on a distributed system. That's kind of the new thing. And, to prove that point, a few months ago, Gavin, when he was in China at Shanghai Fudan University, like he did this demo where he ran Doom on chain, right? So, Doom, the ego shooter from 1993, right? So he ran that game on chain. And, when he did that, like all the game logic and all the graphics, like every pixel in the frame, which color it should have, right? Based on the movement of the character that walks through the maze in Doom, was calculated on chain. Now, you can, of course, say, what's the point, right? Why do we need to run Doom on chain? I could already run that in my shitty old little computer in 1993, which is literally what I did, right? So there's, people go like, there's nothing new to it, but they're obviously missing the point here. And the way they are missing the point is, I'll try to make the same comparison here with Bitcoin versus a calculator, right? Because at the beginning I said Bitcoin is a bit like a calculator. Now, what's the difference between Bitcoin and a calculator? Because, of course, with Bitcoin, you can say, sure, like Alice has one Bitcoin, Bob has 2 Bitcoin, Alice sends 1 Bitcoin to Bob, so how many does he have now? Okay, he has 3 Bitcoin. So that's like a result that I can also achieve with a calculator, right? Somebody who doesn't really get Bitcoin can go like, oh yeah, I mean, it's just a ledger, right? I can do that with a calculator. There is no breakthrough here. But then obviously, as we know nowadays, these guys are kind of missing the point here, right? The new thing of Bitcoin is not that it adds 1 + 2, but that it does that in a distributed and decentralized fashion. And it takes a bit of a switch in mindset to kind of realize that. And it obviously takes a lot of time, or it took a lot of time for people to kind of wake up to that. That's why many people missed Bitcoin. But I guess it's kind of the same kind of switch in mindset that you have to undergo if you want to understand Jam and why running, for example, Doom on chain is such a big breakthrough. Because it's like the same kind of switch from one single computer to a decentralized supercomputer that is happening now with Jam, that happened between a calculator and Bitcoin. As I said at the beginning, Jam is it allows any machine readable code to execute. Now it's able to do that in a decentralized fashion. So I hope that makes sense. I think there are a lot of people who don't really quite get the difference here, right? How powerful it is to execute any machine readable code in a truly decentralized and immutable fashion. And that's, I guess, why a lot of people are missing a lot of the narrative here. And, like with Bitcoin, will be left behind. But for us, we're obviously extremely excited about the technology itself, and more importantly, all the applications that Jam will enable. And that's where we are raising the second fund to invest in this entire ecosystem.
Nice. exactly why we are having this webinar, so that we can learn and be aware of these new things like JAM and the importance to the overall growth of the ecosystem. One more question around architecture, and then I want to move on to sort of looking ahead in the last minutes that we have together. John, elastic scaling, maybe just give us a little bit of like high level, what that is, and how does that, why is that important sort of for like the next wave of high growth, like dApps on Polkadot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of, I kind of alluded to this or mentioned it earlier, but really, because of elastic scaling, we can increase the number of parallel operations happening within the ecosystem. So it really does create, instead of just these what we call parachains or these kind of singular cores and almost like monolithic. It's not monolithic, but ultimately it allows for more for all of the potential kind of compute and blockchain resources to be used more efficiently. It's much more approachable, as I mentioned. There's a marketplace where even if I decide to take on core time and I have too much, I can sell it. If I decide that if I come in and I decide I just want to execute one transaction every month, I can do that on chain. It just creates an incredible amount of flexibility, and we just know that that mass adoption requires this kind of flexibility. It's kind of like what people always think that, or Clinton say that crypto has like technology looking for a use case, and I think that's been true a lot of times. But now we have use cases that can utilize the technology that's being built, because we have that flexibility, and that's what's required. So yeah, I mean it's much more seamless. It's the kind of infrastructure that people need to get in the space.
Nice. Looking ahead, I mean, the space is pretty crowded with a lot of L1s, L2s. Just, what are you going to be paying most attention to for the remainder of 2025 going into 2026? What should we all be paying close attention to when it comes to Polkadot?
Yeah, I guess if that's to me.
Or anyone, all of you. I would love to get each one of your perspective.
Sure. Well, I'm here. Yeah, of course. No, I think we're ultimately looking, like I said, our main focus in Magenta is on AI, DePIN, kind of entertainment, which includes some gaming, but also music and sports. I think we've seen, personally, we've seen a lot of shots on goal, and we can see a lot of really valuable partnerships in the DePIN space. I think of it as kind of like IoT, the next generation of IoT. It's IoT for Web3, and it's something that it's like an analog that people can relate to. So we're focusing a lot there, and then of course there's the intersection with AI, and ultimately, I think we should think of blockchain as infrastructure. And everything else that's being built on block, like specifically being built, is still this infrastructure. It's not really the end user. I think the end user is going to come to the space through something like a game or through like some kind of AI interface. So that's ultimately, there are these centers of gravity that we have in this ecosystem of Polkadot right now around gaming and around DePIN, and also government services and supply chain use cases. So that's where I'm going to be thinking a lot about, and have been, and I would keep a close eye on those.
Max, Wilhelm?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are different ways I could answer to this, but I guess in your question you also alluded to the the landscape of other L2s, L1s, right? And how Polkadot compares there. I think what is really telling at the moment is like the comparison to Ethereum, and we all know the shared history that Ethereum and Polkadot have, i.e. Gavin Wood having co-founded both of them. But look, I mean, Ethereum, with this rollup centric narrative that they kind of embarked to over the past 2 years or so, they were really just doing sort of like a quick attempt to save like the scalability issue, right? They didn't really have like rollups on the roadmap at the beginning. That's like a Polkadot thing, right? Polkadot like realized very early on, and I mean, I think that's in many ways why Gavin Wood left the Ethereum project and started Polkadot, that rollups are the way to scale a blockchain while maintaining security and decentralization. And Ethereum didn't really realize that at the beginning. At the beginning, they just wanted to pack everything onto the main chain. And then just over time, like some of the L2s popped up, and that went well for a while. But now what we're kind of realizing is that there is actually a lot of friction between the L2s and the L1. And that friction is all about fees, right? Because you can, in my opinion, quite rightly accuse the L2s on Ethereum of free riding on the crypto economic security that Ethereum provides, right? They launched their own token, right? Whatever it is, right? With like $1 billion market cap, but they're not really like paying for the security that they get from Ethereum, right? They just send proofs like to the main chain every once in a while, but they're not really paying for it, right? And that can go well for a while, but it cannot go well forever. And there's this law that says something that cannot go well forever will stop at some point. And I think Ethereum is gonna like run into this problem because there's this constant friction. And if you listen like a little bit to like the conversations deep in the Ethereum community, there are a lot of like internal contradictions that are just surfacing right now. I mean, there are people who say like the whole L2 scaling narrative on Ethereum has failed, right? And I think there is something to it. I think it hasn't really fully played out yet, but it's kind of going into this direction. And once again, I mean, Polkadot has already solved this, right? First with the parachain model that now we're just making more general, as we discussed with Agile Core Time. This is already like, it's actually so funny. Like if you now read like the Ethereum roadmap, all the things that are written there that Ethereum publishes now like this year on their roadmap for the next like 3 years, they're all like things that Polkadot already accomplished, right? So they're trying to catch up to where Polkadot is at the moment. And one case in point here is Vitalik published like a post not long ago, like I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he was saying that in the long term, Ethereum has to move away from like the current like sort of EVM architecture and move to a RISC-V architecture, which just generally is considered like a better, more efficient computation logic, sort of base layer computational logic. And guess what? I mean, Polkadot is already written in RISC-V, right? So once again, Ethereum is trying to get in a couple of years, and everyone was saying like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but it's going to take us like 3 years or 5 years to get there, right? Guess what? Polkadot is already there. So once again, this is, I don't want to be seen as like, trash talking Ethereum here, right? But in many ways, Ethereum has some strong like fundamental problems. They're big enough to have enough momentum to, still keep things together. But I think there are some fundamental flaws in the L2, L1, roll-up mechanism in Ethereum, and Polkadot already solved it. So, if you're building a new app now, if you're trying to do something that is future-proof, then why not go to where these problems have already been solved and, where things actually work. So, with that in mind, I'm incredibly bullish on Polkadot, and that's why we're running this fund.
Nice. Wilhelm, you get last word.
Yeah, I think that maybe a big shout out to Web3 and their new deal desk. I mean, if we're looking how we're attracting serious builders, a lot of it is by reducing some of the funding friction and aiding in the BD attraction for those that want to actually come and build and develop, whether it's be as L2s or from Open Zeppelin. I mean, it's pretty much created quite a fast tracking mechanism that allows from more a BD perspective to open the door and say we are open, we're ready for business, and we can speed things up. And I think that this is fantastic if you're a builder globally to have this quick, good access. I mean, if any of you ever have a chance, test, check, contact Deal Desk. They're doing quite fantastic and exciting work. And they cooperate with all of us, right? With Harbour, with Polkadot East, with Magenta Labs, with Velocity Labs, with 265 Dots, naturally, all of us within our focused areas to support Polkadot as a whole. And I find this, again, super exciting and extremely good initiative. And it allows us to do our job actually with less friction.
Nice. Perfect way to end our webinar today. Max, John, Wilhelm, thank you so much for taking the last hour to take us through all the exciting advancements and things taking place on Polkadot across the many different verticals. Everyone, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us for our next Polkadot ecosystem webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you for having us.
us.